Hello everyone and welcome back to the Assistant Room podcast. At whatever stage you are at in your career within the support industry, whether you are just starting out and are still finding your feet, or if you're more experienced and are juggling board meetings with demanding execs and a to-do list as long as your arm, I hope you are all well and having a great week. If we haven't met before, or if you're only just joining us, I'm Jess, founder of online PA lifestyle and membership platform, The Assistant Room. Throughout this podcast, we will be digging deep into the lives and experiences of some of the top personal and executive assistants in the UK and beyond. And for episode 7, I sat down with Abigail Jones, EA at Facebook. As an award-winning support professional and an ambassador of the Assistant Room, Abby and I chatted about the future of the PA industry in a post-COVID world, the importance of failing, and her 3 key takeaways for every assistant to not just survive, but thrive in the modern world of business. I feel like we need to do a celebration because this is the first time we're back in the studio since March. Well, not even before, actually no, before March. And I'm just so happy to finally...
Because we tried to get this done in Feb, didn't it? Didn't happen.
Yeah, it didn't happen. But I feel like we need to have a bit of a celebration, a whoop whoop, for being back in since COVID's finished. Well, it's not finished, is it?
It's not finished.
It's not finished. It's a long way to being finished. But being back in London is lovely.
I like being back in London. I love London.
Yeah.
I'm really happy to be back in London. I've enjoyed seeing people and shops open and going into shops.
Yeah. I walked past my favourite sandwich shop earlier though and I was absolutely devastated to see that there was wallpaper or newspaper.
Which sandwich shop?
It's in Liverpool Street. I can't remember the exact name of it. I just know it's the green sandwich shop that I always used to go to every day when we had our office in Liverpool Street. So I know how to get there. I don't know what it's called.
It's gone.
It's gone. It's gone. Devastated. But hopefully it will pop up again soon. Fingers crossed. But welcome.
Thank you.
I'm so excited for this. Yeah, as you said, we tried doing this in February, didn't we? And we failed epically. I think that was when everything started to go quite drastically wrong in London. Yeah. But we're here now. Which is the important thing. So I feel like you and I could talk for hours and hours and hours and hours. Like we could have our own podcast.
We'd be brilliant.
Series. Yeah, we would. We would. But so let's get a little bit more specific and try and keep this as structured as possible.
Okay.
So perhaps a good place for us to start would be to kind of go back into, the depths of your history and start from the beginning and come up to present day. So just tell us all about you.
So I always knew that I liked organising things. So my first main hobby as a child was stamp collecting, which is as sexy as it sounds. And I always loved that organisation. So I think the signs that I was going to be an EA were actually there from a really young age, that kind of obsessive categorisation and filing and collection and data processing, all those kind of things. And I originally wanted to be an archivist.
Of what kind of information?
Stuff.
Just stuff.
Just stuff.
Yeah. Anything you can get your hands on.
Because it's like archiving is, a very nuanced version of stamp collecting, right? In a way. So one of my first jobs was as the archivist at the National Theatre, the Royal National Theatre.
Wow.
So archiving lots of things like costume information and those kind of things. Anyway, so I'd always liked that kind of control and organisation. And my first degree was in art history with languages, focusing on European art history, specifically Dutch 17th century, which is my passion. It's so niche. And I moved to Amsterdam and lived there for a year to study Dutch 17th century architecture and art, and did my first master's there. Then finished my degree, started working, I think that's when I started working in the archives, and then decided that I didn't want to be an archivist after all. I wanted to be a curator. So I went and did a master's in curatorial studies and loved that because, again, it's a form of collecting an organisation and processing data in a way that is visual for people to understand. So when you're a curator, it's like they say it's like telling a visual story. as you walk around the gallery, you have to be able to understand what the point of this exhibition or display is. So I really liked that. So I got my degree in that, and then I straight away started working for the V&A, Victoria and Albert Museum in London. And
very famous,
beautiful museum.
Yeah.
Loved it. And I was working in different departments, so exhibitions, curatorial, press, PR, and I ended up doing a sort of one of those slash roles where you're press and PR assistant, but I was also a PA to the Deputy Director of Public Affairs at the time.
It sounds absolutely fascinating.
It was very interesting, and I met lots of really interesting artists, and I realised, as much as I love art, I really liked the role of being a PA more in the art world. So I ended up actually working several different roles in the art. So I've worked across Christie's and Sotheby's and different museums and galleries. I was at Tate for a little while. And I really enjoyed the PA side of things. I just thought it was really interesting to be able to understand people's lives and psychologies. And I think there's a huge part of psychology involved in being a PA or EA. So I was working in the art world as a PA, and then eventually moved into the charity sector. And because my goal was at the time that I knew, unfortunately, the art world is not paid terribly well. And as much as you can love it, it doesn't necessarily put food on the table. So I moved to the charity sector, also knowing that it doesn't pay terribly well, but it was a kind of a step towards more corporate.
Yeah.
So I was finding it really difficult to break into more corporate roles because my background was arts and charity. And at the time, if you're a PA, people didn't really think that you had those kind of transferable skills that you could jump sector. And then 2008 happened, where we had the financial crash. And as a result, lots of PAs and EAs were let go. And then a few months later, they were recruiting again on temp basis because they realised they still needed people to process the expenses and make the bookings and do all those things that they didn't want to do themselves. So,
Story of our lives.
So I managed to wangle my way into the scientific community by just being a temp who was a PA. So I was working for big name corporate sort of science-based, like Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer, but not those companies. And as soon as I got those on my CV, it was a lot easier to move more and more corporate, ending up kind of blue chip, because they just needed to see that I had that big corporate name.
Yeah.
Even though the experience is identical, you're still doing the same role. You're just doing it in different location. So I started getting more and more corporate, ended up working for Amex GBT, and hopped between corporate and fashion and beauty. I was working for The Body Shop, previously worked for GHD. I was really liked working in the beauty and fashion industry. I think it appeals to me. I'm a very visual person. Those are my interests and passions. I like knowing about fashion and makeup and so on, but I don't think I'm the right personality type to make a very successful career in that industry. And then I made a huge leap, having come straight from fashion, and I went into tech. So now I'm at Facebook, which I have no experience in tech before. So my career has been very wide and varied across so many different sectors and industries. And I've been very lucky to have won or been nominated for various awards over my career, which is great. But it's been a sort of surprise journey that I couldn't really have planned.
It makes it more fun though, right?
Yeah, because I don't think anyone ever... I'm not convinced that many EAs do plan a career when they start. I think a lot of people would say, I fell into this.
Yeah.
I think it's a very common phrase.
Yeah. It always fascinates me whenever I record these podcasts. Most people say, I was doing this, or I was at university and I did this, and I never considered being a PA. And as you said, I just fell into it. And considering the bad reputation that our industry has, everyone that I speak to started doing something else and then found that they enjoyed the PA side of it more and decided to go into that. And that fascinates me, because I kind of think, okay, well, if the majority of people start off like that and then they figure out that they'd rather be a PA, that should surely be a hugely positive amount of feedback for who we are as individuals?
I actually think it stems back to for example, I don't know if you did, but when I was at school, you had to fill in some kind of careers test thing, and it tells you what, what you should do,
what you should be doing,
or vet or policeman or whatever it is. And I never remember seeing in our careers library any information or pathway or data on what if you're really good at admin, what if your skills are organisation, what if you are a really out-of-the-box thinker. It was all very formulaic things that you could be, but I never once saw EA or PA, and I think it was kind of, I wonder if it's partly because there's some kind of stigma that was attached to the concept of being a secretary from up to the 80s that was almost sort of negative.
Yeah.
And as a result, those careers not suggested because they weren't seen as worthwhile or valid, which is why a lot of us growing up in, say, 80s and 90s, so your 20s, 30s, 40s-year-old women now, fell into that career because at no point did they necessarily think, I should go and be an EA. Because I know that, back in the day, they had like Lucy Clayton's, they had secretarial college, that was a common thing, and you'd go and you'd learn how to type on various things like this. But I don't know if I'm sure they do exist. I'm not familiar with them. I haven't been myself, and I don't know anyone who has, but it's almost like it's a quiet industry that flies under the radar, and which suggests it's not as valued as it should be. But as you've just said, given that so many people cross over, surely that must add the value.
Yeah.
Otherwise, no one would be doing the role.
I just think it's nuts to think that is so many people's experience coming into this industry and developing a very successful long-term career out of it. Yet the perception is still very much the opposite. That just blows my mind.
Well, I mean, we could add in the fact that, this industry is still I think it's the figures something like 98, 99% still female dominated.
Yeah.
So obviously we have a way to go to even up those figures in terms of the type of people doing the role. And I think that's a separate discussion in itself about gender equality and so on.
As I said, we could have a new podcast series.
Why not?
But no, I do think it's very interesting. But let's focus a bit more on like the current time. Obviously, coming out of COVID-19, there's so much uncertainty that people are going through. No one really knows what's going to happen in the next 6 months. Job security is almost non-existent for quite a lot of people. And for the support industry, I mean, every industry has been affected, but for the support industry in particular, there's been a huge impact on so many different things. People's morale is very low. You've got, obviously, as I said, job security isn't a guarantee for anybody anymore. And we've obviously had conversations before about how there needs to be a change in lots of different ways, and how there is going to be a lot of change that happens regardless of whether people or not want it, and they've got to adapt and they've got to embrace it. But if we talk about the future of the support industry, how do you think recruiters and employers will need to adapt when now bringing new talent into businesses from an EAPA perspective, or even just anyone on a support professional level?
I think it's a really, really interesting question, because I think there are several different answers depending on your viewpoint. So first of all, I would say, I think if anyone's been on LinkedIn recently, you would see that so many recruitment agencies, employees are losing their roles because there just simply isn't the employment there for them. So we might see a loss in the number of recruitment agents, or the scope that they have, or the number of experienced recruiters, because obviously it's a form of sales, right? You're selling human ability and skill. And like any other job, you can be very good at it or bad at it or middling at it. So I do wonder if we're going to see a decline in companies using recruitment agents for whatever reason, as in there might not be enough of them, but also those companies may have gone through financial problems themselves, and therefore it is cheaper for them to use LinkedIn as a main recruitment tool rather than pay an agency 10, 15, 20% or whatever it is they do. That's my first thought, is that I wonder if we'll see a rise to more direct one-on-one recruitment rather than using a third party such as recruitment agency.
Yeah.
I also wonder if we might see how recruiters and employers have to adjust how they interview, because we're going to see a lot of people who have unfortunately lost their roles, which is going to make CVs look bitty or jumpy. And this is always a criticism that I'm accused of by various recruiters, which is why I tend not to use them, is that my CV looks jumpy, because as I explained earlier, it is jumpy because I have moved through loads of different sectors, and I would always argue that more experience in across different sectors and industries is a positive. You have to pick up new skills, you have to be very flexible, you have to learn how to adapt, you have to learn new techniques, you have to be able to be good at fitting in. You're always the new girl. It's, a whole range of skills and abilities that you simply don't have if you've been in a role for, let's say, 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
You have other skills and abilities if you've done that. So I think we're going to see a lot of people who, are suddenly being spat out of the workforce and are looking for new roles, and their CVs are going to look very jumpy or different. And say if you're in hospitality and you're not finding a role in hospitality, you're going to have to look for a different sector, which of course you don't have experience in. So companies are either going to have to accept that they're now going to have a lot of candidates that don't necessarily have the traditional experience that they would normally recruit for. Let's say if you're a banking company and you only take candidates who have had 5 years banking experience or 6 years private equity experience, that might not be the case now. You might be looking at candidates who have got very valid experience, but they come from retail or hospitality or whatever. So I wonder if they're going to have to change. And with that, my own personal thoughts, that I always think that, recruitment should be blind. So when you're seeing CVs, any personal data should be removed. Definitely no photos, dates of birth taken off, anything that can identify you as, anything other than your experience, I personally think should be, because how can you operate without prejudice and without bias if that data is on there?
You can't, can you?
You have unconscious bias. For example, if you're looking down a CV and you see that someone's gone to the same school or same university as you, or did the same degree, or has worked in the same place, you immediately have a bias towards them, assuming it's a positive experience, because you're creating a direct kinship between that candidate over another candidate. So I wonder if that might have to be adjusted. And my note, by the way, if anyone is looking for a new role, is always remove personal information off your CV. Definitely no full addresses, no photographs, no date of birth, no hilarious email addresses. Make one that is professional. Hobbies are nice, but they're not terribly vital. So, maybe just a couple of bullet points, not the whole page. It's more about your potential and your capability, I think. So I wonder if, I hope that the job search should become a lot more open as companies realise it doesn't matter necessarily if you I remember applying for some role and being told, oh no, we only take candidates who have a BSc, and I didn't. I had a BA and 2 MAs, but because I didn't have a BSc, I wasn't applicable for the role, even though I had 3 other degrees. So that kind of prejudice, I think that needs to go out the window, because you're going to have this plethora of candidates.
Yeah, and in exactly the same way that you found yourself after the crash, needing a new job, there are thousands of people in that exact same situation right now. So I suppose it's about also making an opportunity out of adversity as well, isn't it? If you've always dreamt to work in the creative sphere, exactly, just apply for it. Don't limit yourself depending on what your previous experience has been. Yeah,
and I think you only get the one shot at life. And I think it's far better to try and fail than not try, because you never know. You might not fail. You might succeed, or you might try something new. And I think fear of holds a lot of us back.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about failing.
Okay.
Let's particularly talk about failing and the importance of failing, because it is very important. No one learns or grows from doing the same thing over and over and over and over again. But obviously, as assistants, it's drilled into us that, we should be thinking that everything has to be perfect all the time. Mistakes aren't acceptable. Your attention to detail has to be on par with some crazy superpower that you see in the films or in films at the cinema. But this job is not easy. It's not a walk in the park. It can be as enjoyable or as difficult, depending on who your boss is. And so having that idea of failing being something that is really bad, I think that that's very unrealistic. and it creates a very strange reality for all of us that doesn't really lend itself to a positive future. So we both had a chat the other day, and I said that what failing was 6 months ago has now actually become a reality for a lot of people through no fault of their own. And we're all so afraid to fail because we're told it means we're bad at what we do. So in your opinion, for assistants around the world, what does failing actually mean, and what has your experience been in failing?
Well, I always like to say if I'm going to fail, I fail spectacularly at it. Like I go in with aplomb.
Like you don't just fall down a couple of stairs, you fall down the whole staircase.
Yeah, go big. Yeah, I mean, of course I failed. There's a brilliant podcast, actually, if anyone wants to look it up, called How to Fail by Elizabeth Day, and various famous people talk about their spectacular fails. And I think that's really important because, first of all, as the majority of us are female, not wishing to alienate our male listeners, but the 98% of us are female, I think we quite often put ourselves on very high standards of expectation. We expect to be able to be good at almost everything, the cliche of being the perfect wife, the perfect girlfriend, the perfect mother, the perfect employee, the perfect EA, the perfect whatever, We also quite often strive for that perfection. We're super hard on ourselves when we don't manage it, or we feel that we haven't managed it to our own expectations that we ourselves set. So I think it's really hard to accept failure, because when you accept your failure, you are having to recalibrate your own opinion of yourself and your own sense of ego. And that is very hard, and you're not going to like to do that. That's not a fun, Saturday afternoon hobby. And I think it's really tough, because actually what I think we should be doing is we should reject the word and notion of failure as a negative, because of course some words have really negative connotation, like the word feedback has a negative connotation. The word failure is a very negative connotation. What if we took that away and it sort of needs a rebranding, it needs a repackaging, where failure is actually about learning and growing or doing things differently. And if we said, well, I didn't fail at this, I just did it a different way.
Yeah.
And that you may have thought I should have done it, right? So I have failed quite a lot. Like, for example, I have taken jobs that I kind of knew weren't right for me, but I did it anyway because I needed a job. And I didn't like the concept of myself being out of work, because that's another blow to your ego. I have worked in sectors and industries that definitely weren't right for me, and I don't have the natural skills and abilities to do so, unlike other people. And I have made bad decisions and then had to live with the consequences. And on day to day, you do mess things up. You do, accidentally book one hotel that your boss hates and you forgot that, or you forgot to arrange the return taxi, or you forgot that he's now going or she's now going through a gluten-free phase and you ordered their meal and it wasn't, you make mistakes.
These things happen.
All the time. They happen.
Yeah.
And we can beat ourselves up, metaphorically for days on end. So my favourite story, I'll keep her nameless, as an EA friend of mine. She's got decades of experience, and she just had a complete mind blip one day, and her boss said, I need to fly to place X. Now, place X happens to be in 2 different countries, but it has the same name. So it's one of those places, like there's a Birmingham in the States and there's a Birmingham in London, like one of those kind of things. And she just had a mind blip and she booked the wrong place X. So, boss arrives at the airport, because it was one of those places, it's either one country or another, and gets on the plane and manages to not do any of the checks themselves, where they'd think, at all points.
Blind trust, though, isn't it?
Blind trust.
Yeah.
So, I think that's a win for her, actually, that he trusted her so much. And he gets on the plane, the hours go by, he gets off the plane, and he doesn't even twig until he's outside in the taxi rank and he notices the signs are in the wrong language. So it's taken him the best part of a day to realise he's in the wrong country, at which point he calls her up and she has a complete meltdown. Like outwardly, she's terribly professional. She just books him on the next flight back and he just stays in the airport. Jobs are good and all done. But she phones me and there's almost kind of hysteria that she's either rationally calm or so hysterical that she's become rationally calm, that kind of unbelievable panic. And this now happened, I'd say, must have been a couple of years ago, and she still remembers that panic, that sweat, that fear, that anxiety, that self-flagellation. She can remember it all this time later, and I can, because I heard it when she was going through it. And on one hand, it makes for a very funny story. On the other hand, she still cites that as her biggest failure. And actually, I think there was kind of dual culpability there. He did blindly get on a flight. Although it's hysterical. And she was going for an interview fairly recently, and they asked her what's her biggest failure. And we had a conversation. I prepped her and I said, look, I don't think you should mention this as a failure. I think you should use that example as a time where you fixed a problem.
Yeah.
Because we purpose it for showing, okay, a mistake happened, you owned up to it, and then you fixed it. And so it wasn't really a failure. It was learning how to not do that thing again. So I think failure is a hard one. I think you have to, sometimes when I fail at things, or I get it wrong, or I don't learn and grow because I make the same mistake twice, because you hope you won't make the same mistake twice, but you quite often do. And, you're under so much pressure and it just happens, is you just have to let it go.
Yeah.
Think I'm not God. I'm not perfect. I make all the mistakes, and sometimes people notice and then just own up to it and apologise. And sometimes people don't notice, in which case just never mention it again.
Exactly. But being a support professional, there's just so much going on all the time, isn't there? You're going to slip up. You're not going to always be able to do everything absolutely right. But as you said, with regards to your friend, it's about how you deal with it at the time. You can either focus on it, think, oh my God, what have I done, and retreat and not be able to get back on track. Or you can take control, you can fix it, and then you can look back on it, objectively later on and think, as you said, okay, I've learned how not to do that now.
Yes, I mean, there's loads of things I've learned how not to do beautifully.
I love that. Learning how not to do things is a great way to look at it.
And then I try to never do those things again. And I also think, it's very applicable in one's career. Like, I have learned there are some industries I don't want to work in, and I have learned there are some people I don't want to work for. So, as we all know, when you're in the APA, particularly if you're working one-on-one, you have to become very good at, quite frankly, psychology and learning how to read someone else's moods and reading their mind and all this kind of thing and getting on with them. And there are some types of personality that I would really rather not do that with, because I find it too much. I don't want to be around toxic, negative personalities for me. Other people can work with them absolutely fine, of course, but it's not for me. And I wouldn't have learned that had I not done it in the first place. And then I could accidentally sort of walk into a trap of working for someone that I thought was good, but actually wasn't the right fit for me. I think it's important that people try something. It's like, if you never tried a particular dessert and you always avoided the dessert on the menu and people were telling you you're missing out, eventually, if you try it, you could then agree or disagree. But you won't know.
Oh my God, my sister does this every time. We go to an Italian restaurant. I know her order. It will be spaghetti bolognese and garlic bread. And I just try and say to her, just try something else. Come on.
But then that's about comfort zone, isn't it?
But it is about comfort zones, you're right. And everybody has to constantly break out of their comfort zone to experience anything new in life.
Yeah, and I think quite often as EAs, we are facilitating other people's comfort zones without necessarily giving our own much regard. So whatever you're doing, just to bring it back to this idea of failure, maybe recalibration of what you consider failure is worth it. So, for example, are the things that frightened you at age 20 that you were frightened of failing, are they still the same things that frighten you now? Or have they changed, or have they grown? And I think it's sort of like reviewing anything, like reviewing your political opinion or reviewing, tastes of foods, or maybe your sister will get there eventually, give her another 10 years.
Fingers crossed. God, I can't wait till we go to an Italian restaurant and she orders a lasagna. Like, it's exactly the same thing, but
it's just flatter.
Yeah. But no, you're 100% right. And I think as well, if you look back and think, okay, this scared me when I was 20, maybe you've actually already done that thing.
Oh, yeah.
You're not scared of it anymore.
I did loads of stupid stuff in my 20s. And I mean, one of them, when I moved to Amsterdam when I was 19, I didn't realise until I was on the flight that I didn't speak Dutch or know where Amsterdam was.
Great start.
I had a little bit of a mini breakdown on the plane, and I don't think it even sold alcohol. So I just had to have a panic sort of over the English Channel to myself, and then just got on with it.
Yeah. You just got to deal with it, haven't you? Yeah, get on with it. That's a great way to think about it. Well, considering there are so many, you've had so many accomplishments And you've done all of those things and you've won all of the awards and you've been nominated for all these awards. And now you've got this amazing job at Facebook, which so many people would absolutely love to have. And you've done all those things in spite of failing. And also you're an independent coach and a mentor, which is fantastic. And you help assistants all around the world to really hone in on their skills, and you become that person who they can rely on to kind of work with them through the problems that they've got. So I'm not necessarily interested in what your favourite lesson has been that you've learned throughout all of this, but what has been the most valuable lesson?
Well, I've got 3 because I think one is too simple. So the thing that I have really learned, the biggest thing I've ever learned, is that your career is really what you make of it. So it came as kind of a big shock to me to come out of university and realise that nobody was going to tell me what to do with my life. I don't know if you ever experienced that, but school is very easy. You're told to go to this, and then you're told to do your GCSEs, and then you're told to do your A-levels, and then you're told to go to university or do a gap year or whatever it is. And, it's quite mapped out. And unless you've chosen a career where it's quite obvious, for example, be a vet or be a doctor, and then you have to go and do this degree for this many years, if you don't really know what you want to do with yourself, it's a bit sort of like gazing to the abyss. And on one hand, the freedom is expansive and exciting and intoxicating, and on the other hand it's completely terrifying to not really know what you want to do with your entire life. So when I started being a PA, it sort of dawned on me quite quickly that I had to make it myself. So I realised I could, for example, stay being a junior assistant at the V&A or press assistant, whatever it was, for the best part of 20 years if I wished, on pretty much the same pay. Which I think was not great at the time. And every time I made a leap or made a step to a new career, it felt like almost doing something naughty and kind of waiting to be caught and be told, oh no, you can't do that, you're not good enough. I think that's really imposter syndrome raising its head there.
Yeah.
But, because there was no one directing me, it was a big shock. So every time I made a jump and made a leap, and I've done it now so many times that I feel very confident in doing it, was the thing that has really driven me is I can do what I want, within reason, with my career. And no one can tell me otherwise. And all I need is that one job interview where it's the right job interview, for it to click, for it to feel good, for it to feel like, yeah, this is what I want to do. These are the people I want to work with and for. Or this is a company I believe in, or this is the right circumstances for me at the time. And having that confidence, which is really sort of leads me on to my second point, is confidence is everything. And, that phrase, if you don't believe in yourself, and why should anyone else? I think is very true.
Fake it till you make it as well.
Yeah.
For sure.
And if you're not happy, change it.
Yeah.
And I think that applies. It applies in everything. It applies for relationships. It applies for careers. It applies to almost every aspect of your career in terms of it's got to work for you, because it has to be making you happy enough for you to want to spend 8+ hours a day for 5 days a week until we're 65, 67. I don't even know what the pension age is now. It keeps changing. But that feels like a long time to be unhappy for. And my last sort of thing that I would raise is the freedom to make decisions. We are so blessed, particularly in this country, to have the freedom of making these decisions. We are able to self-determine, and that if you decide to change something, we have the freedom and ability to do this. For example, if you're in a toxic working relationship, if you're in a negative working environment, you may not be able to change that environment as much as you may love the people, or you may really like the pay, or you might like the commute. If something isn't right, having the confidence, the freedom to change that is everything. I mean, I've told the story before where I worked in for a particular company and I just got so overstressed, and I hated it so much, and the pressure and the long hours and every element. I took the job because I liked the company and I liked the industry it was in. Unfortunately, the pressure and the stress I couldn't handle, and after a while I ended up having a heart attack at work. And that, on one hand, is my biggest failing, because I felt like I failed at being able to do the job and stay alive, which is, a fairly basic requirement of going to work. And I thought, I failed at that. And how will I ever be an EA again? And how pathetic of me that I can't just simply do this.
Considering how extreme that situation was as well, though, for you to feel like you failed in that specific situation, I think well, I was terribly cross with myself as well, because I saw it as a sign of weakness. And, I'd never experienced anything like this, relatively young and fit and, don't smoke and so on. And I really thought that it just showed that if I couldn't handle the stress and pressure of a really busy role, what business did I have being an EA? And after the hospital and the recuperation and, all of this, which took a while, I really felt quite depressed. I thought, how can I ever work again? Because apparently I can't even handle going to work. It's pathetic. I really, really went in on myself. And, the doctors were saying, we can offer you antidepressants. I really didn't want to take those because I'd never taken them before, and I had a bit of anxiety. And I think I felt there was a stigma around it, even though, of course, there isn't. And it took me a little while to kind of, quite frankly, get over myself and take the antidepressants. I came off them, I think, after about a month or so, and to sort of repackage what had happened in my brain as not me failing, but my body telling me it's not right. Enough is enough. Enough is enough. Yeah. So I quit that role, and I got another role. I think a couple of months later it was fine. But that all kind of packages up what I've just been saying about freedom and confidence, and your career is what you make of it, because I should have listened to my body earlier, but I was stubborn and I didn't. Yeah. Were you worried that the thought of failing, which obviously was you being in a very stressful environment and you ending up having really severe health problems, did you feel like if you disclosed that to a future employer that they would hold that against you in some way, or they wouldn't feel as though you were up to the job when you were going through the interview process? Well, actually, I have decided to use it as a massive strength, because I think I actually mentioned it I definitely mentioned it in one of my interviews, because I said, because you always get a question about how do you handle stress and how do you handle pressure, and I've had to completely reevaluate how I handle stress and pressure after this experience. And so now I'm very, very good at handling stress and pressure, because I know that I only have a certain limit that my body can take. So now I talk about it, and I say, in the interview situation, I sort of say that I've become extremely good and I know my limits because I've had this experience. And actually, I think it's made me stronger rather than weaker, because otherwise I'd still be doing this awful job, probably having heart attacks every 5 minutes. Well, I wouldn't, would I? I'd have one more serious one and that would probably be game over. So, yeah, absolutely. I do talk about, I try to, and I talk about, so I also bring up in interviews, I'm dyscalculic, which is like dyslexia, but affects numbers. And I have been tested by the various bodies and, confirmed dyscalculic. And I can raise it in interviews in case I'm ever asked to do things for budgets or numbers, things that I would find quite stressful and I'm not brilliant at. And I explain what I do to get around that, what procedures I've put in place to counteract the fact that I struggle with this, and how it's made me stronger. And I know, and whenever anyone says, what are your weaknesses? Well, that's a very good one. Don't put me in charge of lots of graphs, for example. Just forget Excel. I'm just going to leave it alone. So, weaknesses are also your strengths. I think that's a really, really important message for everybody listening to this to really take on board, that you should look at what you consider, previous failures or issues that you, or things that you think are issues or disadvantages that you think you've got, and turn them into positives. Because most PAs probably would think, oh God, I cannot tell them that I can't work with numbers. I can't do that because there's something on the job description that says I need to be able to use Excel really well. But if you're open and honest and disclose that from the beginning and get it out the way straight away, surely you're just going to have a really lovely positive conversation going forward. Everybody knows what the situation is. Everybody's on the same page. And I suppose it's about reclaiming your power as well, isn't it? Yeah, instead of hiding it and being ashamed, because I think it's very easy to feel that way for sure. I think
just vocalizing it and explaining why, because, it's nothing I can do. I can't sort of get in there and fix a bit of brain. I can't make the neurons work. I can't take a pill that's going to make this problem. Like this is how we are. And I have to, my current role, I remember the person who interviewed me, who ended up being my boss, she, by pure coincidence, had been working on a program at a completely different company about dyscalculia, because in the same way that if you use a yellow background for dyslexic people, it helps them read. So I understand that for dyslexia, it sort of feels like words are wiggling all over the page. They don't sit still. So for dyscalculia, it's the same, but with numbers. So when I look at a string of numbers, like lots and lots of telephone numbers, it kind of feels like the numbers are jiggling around or turning back to front or going upside down or moving. I can't trust that they're going to stay where I think they're going to stay. So, but if you read it on a yellow background, there's something about that really helps. I don't know the science behind it. And anyway, the person that I was speaking to who's interviewing me, she'd worked on this thing where they were trying to make like Kindle screens, or I don't know, some kind of tech screen yellow for those people.
Interesting.
So instead of it being a really negative conversation about here's a thing I can't do and I think you're going to judge me, it was that's fascinating. Let me tell you what we've been working on. And
I love that.
It was a really positive experience.
Yes, and that just kind of proves that anything you do think is going to be a disadvantage for you, just be open about it, because you never know, it might spark a really interesting conversation that could lead further down the line to something else and could actually put you in the running more so than other people.
Yeah, and and it also neatly takes care of any question they have, like, do you have any weaknesses, or do you have anything that you can't do, and those kind of awkward questions where you feel like you have to say, I'm a perfectionist, which is a rubbish answer.
God. Or you have to make something up.
Or you have to make something up.
Yeah, exactly.
And also, it's not unusual. Dyslexia and dyscalculia is incredibly common and very well known about and valid. And also I'm of the opinion the more awareness, the better.
Yeah. If we kind of summarise all of your experience, let's summarise this conversation and let's think about the changes that this industry has gone through and the changes that are going to be happening quite rapidly over the next year. If there were any kind of key takeaways, if you had 3 key takeaways that you wanted every assistant right now to take on board, not just to survive, but thrive in what is probably going to be a very new type of world and in a very modern world of business, what would they be?
I think the importance of knowing what it is you want from your job. So some of us may have experienced, things like more family time, less commute time. Maybe we want part-time working from home. Maybe actually we've realised we hate working from home. I think the ability to reassess whatever it is that is important to you is a key takeaway, because this has given us the opportunity to reevaluate what we consider important in our careers. Maybe actually you don't want to be an EA or PA, or maybe you've been using this time to really think about what you want to do, or maybe you haven't had the time to think about what you want to do and you just want to get back to work. Whatever it is, it has to be important to you. I would feel very sad if I felt that going to work was a really negative experience. That would really depress me. I think also, I don't know about you, but I've learned quite a lot about myself in lockdown.
No comment.
So I think things like, what have you missed or not missed? So I actually haven't missed. I have been very fortunate. I have been employed through lockdown. Work has continued as normal. I don't have any pets, which is a great shame. I might change that. I have a partner who manages to not be too irritating. That's good. We haven't had any big rows over lockdown. Also good. I've been able to exercise more. Also good. So for me, there's been quite a lot of positives. I have been very lucky. But I have also learned things like I'm definitely an introvert with extrovert learnt behaviour, which I kind of knew before. But watching my extroverts go through lockdown has been a very, very different experience for them. And it's been really interesting. The things that they have struggled with have not been the things that I have struggled with. And so one of my good EA friends, she thinks it's hilarious to send me lots of memes about hugging. And I'm not really a big hugger. I mean, I do it, but, it's not my raison d'etre. And she loves a hug. And I just know that as soon as she is allowed, she's coming at me like force 10 hug level.
Arms wide open.
Oh my God, she's going to go
running
for it.
at you at 10 miles per hour.
And I will still be backing away. Even after 6 months of not seeing her. And I think the last takeaway would be about having confidence and flexibility. So I've actually never had a role where I've really been able to work from home with any significant amount of time. Maybe once a week in a blue moon, I got permission to work from home. I think like many EAs, particularly if you have particularly for EA to CEO, and particularly if you're in a really corporate role, it's so hard to get working from home on a regular basis. Even like one of my friends who is a mum, she needs to work from home, and even that was a bit of an uphill battle. And so having that kind of confidence and flexibility, the confidence that actually I can do my job really, really well from home. So it's not about ability. It was just about rules previously. And the fact that, in lockdown, you've had to work in different ways. Everyone's had to move to, say, virtual everything, and which is draining in itself. And can be really
very
tiring.
different. I think a lot of people probably thought it'd be easier than it has been.
I think it's very exhausting. And the blurring of home life and work life has been a new challenge that some people are comfortable with and some people aren't, which I completely understand. So that we've all gone through challenging times in very different experience. And having that kind of takeaway of being able to know that you can adapt and be flexible even in difficult times, and giving yourself that kind of permission to find it difficult and not expect to be a perfect parent and a perfect wife and a perfect employee or whatever it is you have in your life, I think is actually quite powerful. And I really hope that companies can see the value of having their EAs and PAs work from home if they want to, rather than the blanket ban of no, you can't get into the office, bums on seats.
Yeah. And before we finish, we also have to talk about the coaching and the mentoring that you do, because obviously it's a huge part of your identity. It's a huge part of how you help people all around the world. So we can't not have this conversation without you talking and telling everybody listening a little bit more on about how, they can get involved or how they can contact you directly if they think, yes, Abby's the one for me.
Yeah, I decided to be a coach mentor a few years ago now, because when I was going through difficult times, I had a really nightmare boss at the time. I had a difficult work environment. I had quite a difficult job and I wasn't really enjoying any of it. And I thought, my gosh, I wish there was somebody who could understand what I'd gone through, give me practical solutions, help me through it, and who could just really get it. So, you can absolutely go to any random life coach, of course, or any mentor. They don't necessarily have to be in your industry, but there's something about EA to EA, PA to PA, and they get it because they've been through it, they understand. You don't have to explain nuance and background and scenario because there's that shared understanding. So I couldn't find anyone really who could offer that at the time. There are people who offer similar, but not really what I was looking for. So I decided to become a coach and mentor myself, and went away and did all that, and then got qualified and started coaching. And as much as it helps my clients, it is incredibly, I really feel grateful that I get to share their confidence and they can discuss things with me, because it's so important that you have someone to speak to who understands it, is practical. A top tip, if you are looking for a coach or mentor, make sure they're qualified, but also you should have like a free introductory phone call with them, which is what I offer, to make sure that you click. There's no point in spending time with somebody that you just don't want to speak to, right? It doesn't work. So I have clients all over the world. I have hour sessions at a time. We focus on either ideas that they have come with. There's a particular problem. For example, my boss is really controlling, or he expects me to mind read, or my boss doesn't place any value in me, or I'm having a difficult time saying no, or I've got difficult personalities I'm having to work between, or I'm struggling with this aspect of my role, or I want a pay rise and I don't know how to ask for it, or I don't know how to interview well, or all these kind of things. And so I work with lots of clients, and it's such an experience, but also they've got to get something out of it. There's no point in spending an hour talking to me and there's no action. So all my clients get homework, which they agree to, and it's the point of it is to get them to the next step, because it's it should be results for me. It should be results driven, and so you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm also on Instagram as the PA Coach, and I have my own website where you can connect with me. And if you want to see any recommendations, you can have a look on my LinkedIn as well.
Yeah, and we'll make sure that all of those contact details and every kind of way that people can connect with you are, available on the podcast description as well. But I do think you're right, to be able to have a successful relationship with anybody who can guide you on anything in life, they need to be qualified. No one can just read a self-help book or a life coach book and then suddenly the next day wake up and say, I can help everybody overcome all of their problems. You have to have that trust in somebody that what they're advising you is correct, and you can't just wake up and have that skill.
No, and it's very much a learning skill. Every client you have teaches you something as well, and that's why I only focus on coaching and mentoring EAs and PAs, because I don't think there are enough of us out there doing that, and I also think that we're sort of each generation helps each other, and there wasn't anyone for me, so at least I can give something back for the next group of young, keen EAs coming up. Or you don't even have to be young and keen, just EAs in general, anyone that is looking for that guidance or help or kind of support or information or advice, or sometimes really it's something really deep that they've been struggling with. If you've ever had a negative performance review and then you sort of go away with that information, but you don't really know how to fix it, and they don't really help you necessarily.
No, they just shout things at you and say you're doing this wrong, this wrong, this wrong. Yeah. Sort it out.
But then how do you know how to fix that?
You don't. And most of the time you end up, as we said earlier, overthinking things, thinking that you need to be perfect, X, Y, Z. As you said, feedback has a very negative connotation. But you need to learn and understand, whether that's by yourself or with somebody else, how to change that bad into something good. And then you can use your failures as a positive.
Perfectly put.